Welcome to How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Rietta, and today I am here with Jason Tuttle. So, Jason, how do you deal when the shit gets real? Or just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, how I deal with that? Wow, that's a loaded question. Um, I'm a married father of two special needs kids that were born with a multitude of cognitive and physical disabilities. I've been married this year will be 22 years, if my math is correct. In the first 5 years of my marriage is when we had both of our kids and found out about all of their issues that kind of put us on the life of special needs that we lived definitely through my son's entire life and continue to live with his sister.
So, you had one boy and one girl, is what I'm getting.
Yes, boy first, girl second.
Okay. And are you able to elaborate on what kind of special needs that they have?
Sure. How much time you got? Um,
As much time as you need.
Well, the simplistic way to answer it is both of my kids, my kids were born 2 years apart almost to the day, and both of them have severe neurological delays, meaning no matter their age, they're still functioning about 7 to 9 years old. They both have epilepsy. In fact, of the 6 different kind of seizures that are known out there, I've seen 4 of them in my house.
Oh, my goodness.
Both of them they're considered nonverbal. They do say a few very basic words, but they don't talk much outside of that. So they're
Okay.
nonverbal. They do walk with assistance, but not without it. So they're basically wheelchair bound. But like if I were to hold them up under their arms, they could walk with me, or they could like army crawl like nobody's business. But to like walk on their own, no. And then my son, on top of the neurological delays, the epilepsy, being nonverbal, not walking, being in a wheelchair, was born with a rare condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome. And at the time he was born, it was 1 in 40,000 births.
Oh, okay. So that's pretty rare.
It is. And as of the last time I checked it, it is still considered a rare condition.
Yeah, I've never even heard of it. So what does that entail?
Well, I'll give you the simplistic listing of it. So the reason why it's rare, first of all, is because they believe it's to be something related to the GI kind of system in that area. They believe it's related to kidney issues, but they don't know the official starting point of it. They don't know what causes it. So Eagle-Barrett syndrome basically means my son was born without any core abdominal muscle, meaning I could lay him on the floor. The only thing between the outside world and his organs was the skin and like the fascia that holds it together. That was it. So
wow.
I could lay him on the floor, and I could, from the outside, I could touch his large intestine, his small intestine, his bladder, you name it, everything down there. In fact, like when you were in high school and you had that plastic like half biology dummy,
Mm-hmm.
the way it would stand up on a table, well, that lower section, I could literally see all that.
Wow.
The first time I ever did it, it was kind of freaky the first time I'd ever seen it, but I quickly got used to it. So he was born without core abdominal muscles. He was also born with an abnormally large bladder that didn't want to. He could go to the bathroom, but it didn't give him the sensation to want to go to the bathroom. So like when you and I drink something and we drink too much, we realize soon thereafter we've got to go use the restroom to relieve ourselves. Well, he didn't necessarily get that. So for at least the first 5 years of his life, I had to cath him every 4 hours to drain his bladder, because if I didn't, he would be very susceptible to urinary tract infections. And one of the reasons why, like when we go to the bathroom, why you want to try to get it all out is because there's sediment in that fluid, and that sediment is what does the irritating and causes the infection. And that's why the big reason why you want to try to get out as much as possible. So he had no core abdominal muscle. He had an abnormally large bladder. prune-bellied kids typically have a lot of major kidney issues, like transplant style issues. Luckily for my son, he never had those issues. That was never a concern up until he actually passed. But so there was that. And then kind of one of the secondary issues that my son really dealt with is he had normal lungs, but he had kind of a diminished lung capacity. And what I mean by that is, say you or I get a flu, a pneumonia, one of those style illnesses. Well, because we have a core abdominal muscles, we've got kind of that cement foundation that we can build pressure on to push on, so you can get that deep cough and cough the crud out. Well, he didn't really have that. So we learned really quickly that if I didn't get on it fast enough, he was going to be admitted to the hospital. Now, later on down the road, we started seeing a pulmonologist, and I literally had 6 respiratory machines in my house
Oh my
that
goodness.
every time I would hear a certain cough, I would start that kind of protocol. But all of those like physical things right there, those are kind of the main core things that dealt with Eagle-Barrett syndrome. Now, there are a lot of secondary issues that go along with it, but that's kind of the core of it.
So everything that both of your children have, and I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this, is all that kind of correlated, or is it just kind of ironic that they had so many different issues?
Well, the thing that we've done genetic testing for over a decade now, and they still can't figure out is the irony of everything is right before our son was born, my father got really big into like ancestry.com, that kind of
Hmm.
stuff, doing lineage. He went back 10 generations. There were no medical issues to be found in any side of my family and any member of my family that wasn't self-induced. And what I mean by that is like an alcoholism or something to that effect. My wife's family went back 5 generations, and there were no issues that we knew of other than self-induced. So when we had our son and then later on had our daughter, we had 2 that were born almost 2 years to the day, and they were identical in their issues,
Hmm.
except for the rare condition my son had. So there was no really big correlation that we know of. It just, that's kind of the way the pieces fell, if you will.
Interesting. That's got to be kind of hard to have two kids that just happen to have so many issues.
It was what a lot of people will tell you, especially those that especially their first child, they're kind of introduced into the special needs life and the special needs world and just everything related to it. It's a very steep uphill learning curve. And whereas most people have kind of a general angle going up, theirs is like this, mine was like that.
Oh my goodness,
Going,
yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of trial and error in that first 5 or 6 years. There were a lot of surprises, if you will, from like my son's issues. You know about the main things that happen to, but what people don't tell you is what are the secondary things that pop up because of that issue. And that was the frustration was, I was starting to see all these things. I had no idea what to deal with and how to deal with them. And should I call an ambulance? Should I go to the hospital? And that's kind of what my first 5 or 6 years was.
Yeah, that had to be really hard. And I know this probably isn't going to have a straightforward answer, but because you had such a steep trajectory of learning, what would you tell or give advice to for other parents that might be starting their special needs journey?
Well, I'm pretty simplistic in my responses, and I'm also pretty blunt, but just because I'm 19 years into it and I've developed a very thick skin about it. I tell a lot of special needs parents first getting into it is it sucks. It's terrible. I mean, it's life altering. It's one of those ones where you go, why me? Why us? Why are we getting all these issues? It's if you need to go out into the garage and have kind of a like punching a hole through the drywall kind of moment, go ahead and go out and do it. That's a normal reaction to going from what you thought was going to be normal to just this world that you have no idea about. And you can do that for a while, but what I try to tell them is you can't do it forever, because you've eventually got to start getting to the point where you are their biggest advocate, and you've got to start making things happen for them and their quality of life and their care and all. So yeah, you can have those moments, but at a certain point, you gotta, for lack of a better word, suck it up and deal with it.
I mean, that is a very honest answer though, but I appreciate a good honest answer.
Mm-hmm.
So you did unfortunately lose your
Mm-hmm.
son.
I did.
How did you handle such a profound loss?
Oh, well, to kind of backtrack just a tiny bit, what I learned after my son passed that I didn't realize in the beginning when both of my kids were born was I was actually grieving in that moment when they were born, not because they were born, but more because of the life I thought we were going to have versus the life we were dealt. And
Mhm.
so I didn't realize for the longest time I was just grieving the fact that life would never be normal. And now that we get to my son passing, yeah, it was incredibly difficult. Um, it was a gut punch. It was fast. It was unexpected. The morning of the day he passed, from the time I woke him up till he was pronounced was less than 2 hours.
Oh my
Uh, it
goodness.
we started seeing issues. The reality is 3 days before we kind of started seeing something of what I thought was like a 24-hour virus. And, at that point, with those kind of things, they've just got to work themselves through. There's not a whole lot you can do with them. And so that's kind of what I thought it was. But that morning when I got him up and realized the signs were different, things were different, and, I needed to make a decision. Um, it was honestly a gut call that I took him up to the hospital. And I mean, even though the circumstances didn't turn out the way I wanted them to, I'm glad he was there because they had vastly more knowledge and experience to try to help save him versus what I do. But it was incredibly difficult, at least well, it was for his mother, but for me, in the sense of I was the stay-at-home parent, I was the 24/7, 365 day care. When he got admitted to the hospital, I went with him. I was admitted with him. I stayed with him. I got discharged with him. In the 101 days he was in the hospital, uh, I was there 98 of them. Um, so I mean, I was always there. Um, and at least from the male perspective, the first emotion I had was a lot of anger. It wasn't necessarily directed at anybody, it was more of an internal anger, but I had a lot of it.
Yeah. How old was he?
He had just turned 15. He was 15 for about a month.
So very young.
Yes.
Did he have ways to communicate with you?
Yes. Even though he was nonverbal, like I got really good at asking both of my kids kind of yes no questions. So, like, if he wanted to do something, he would go, or he would clap his hands, or he loved bath time. And anytime he heard me turn on the faucet for the tub, he would hysterically kind of lose his mind because that was one of his favorite things.
Oh.
So, there were ways that he let me know that he wanted to do something, but to like say them back to me, no. Like I could sign to him basic signs and he would kind of do his basic response, but could he sign back to me? No.
Okay. I was just wondering. I'm sure that made things even more difficult too, the barrier of being able to communicate with him.
It was the first 5 to 6 years just because when he got sick and things were bothering him, he couldn't tell me where was bothering me. I had to figure it out. And that's one of the reasons why I got so well at learning his nonverbal cues and his body language that there were a couple of times that I literally brought him into the ER as the pneumonia was forming. And like
Wow.
they admitted him overnight for observation. And then that next day, the doctor came in and said, I don't know how you did it. And I said, did what? I said, and he was just like, based on the x ray last night versus the x ray early this morning, the x ray last night tells me his pneumonia was forming as it was in the ER. And so you couldn't have brought him in any sooner.
I mean, they always talk about intuition.
Mm-hmm.
That is a prime example of you following your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm assuming part of this kind of led to your passion about starting a movement for men to have a place to grieve and share their emotions and their trauma.
I did. And well, the running joke that I tell people, the sole reason why I started this movement was actually out of spite. And
Oh,
the re and I say that jokingly because, after everything had happened and I had a few days to kind of process things and kind of get some of it out, I got on Facebook, and we all know Facebook has a group for everything.
it does.
And I went to go find grief groups, and I joined several of them. But unfortunately, in grief groups, because it's emotion based, typically it's 98% women and it's about 2% men. And then of those 2%, very few, if any, are actually active, like responding to posts, posting, that kind of stuff. And so it was frustrating that all I really wanted was maybe not someone to understand exactly what I was dealing with, but to kind of be in the ballpark is
Mm-hmm.
all I really wanted. Unfortunately, they had to have lost a child to kind of be in the ballpark, but at least they kind of got that. And I just couldn't find it. And so I got into a group, if I remember, it's parents who had lost a special needs child, which I'm surprised I found that because that's a very niche group that I never thought would have been out there, but I found it. And I got in there for a while. And in the midst of all this, I'm a big proponent of counseling and therapy. I believe that, we all run through seasons of probably needing it. And right after my son had passed, I started seeing my counselor again. And, I'd been going weekly for 2 months at that point. And it was one of those visits about the 2 month mark. She goes, "Well, have you ever thought about journaling?" And I sat there for a minute and thought about it and said, you know, I don't know if I'm that great of a writer, is the ironic thing I said for those that follow me now. I said, I don't know if that's something I really want to do. And so she looks at me and goes, "Well, you don't necessarily have to do it right now." She said, "You can kind of put it on the back burner, if you will, but it's more to get it off your chest. It's kind of a mindfulness activity." She said, "You can write it in a Word document and delete it, or you can write it physically out and like shred it or burn it. I'm not saying that you have to share it unless that's something you just want to do." So I got that, and I put it kind of on my mental side table, and it sat there probably 9 months. It sat there the longest time. I resisted. I didn't want to do it. It just wasn't something that interested me. And then one day I got onto Facebook and I was watching either a Facebook reel or video or something to that effect. And I don't even remember what the video was about. And something in that video just struck a chord with me. It was something, maybe an idea or a concept that related to my son. And I lost it. I mean, I doubled over and was just intensely just sobbing because of, I don't even remember what the concept was, but I remember it really caught my attention. And when I finally regained my composure, I opened a Word document in proper letter writing form. Dear Zachary, and I just verbally vomited on a page. And I mean, I probably wrote 2 pages of a letter, and very raw, very open. And like, if I felt like I needed to use expletives to kind of explain how I'm feeling, that's how I wrote it. And I did that several times a day for weeks on end. And several weeks went by, and I went back to that initial first group, and I got to know that the female admin of it very well. And I asked her one day, I said, "Do you mind if I post one of my journal entries?" And honestly, before I could finish the thought, she goes, "Yes." She said, "We don't ever get any men in here willing to open up on kind of their side of grief. We would love to hear your stance on it." So I picked one of the letters and I paused for a minute. I thought, do I really want to post this? Because even though it's a noble idea, it's still the internet. And in the state of mind in which I was in at that time, am I going to be able to handle negative comments should I get them? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to jump down people's throats because maybe they don't agree necessarily with my stance. But I still submitted it, and I waited, and it was probably that evening I started getting kind of a massive response, like I was getting notifications, and I thought, well, here it goes. I might as well dive into it. And it was massively positive. I mean, literally everybody that was commenting on it was positive. And the one I'll never forget is a lady in there goes, we've never met, we've never crossed paths. She goes, I have never told anybody what I feel like kind of deep down inside, kind of what my dark feelings are. And she goes, I just read your letter. And she said, your letter word for word resonates with me, every word in it. She said, I feel exactly like what you presented. And I said, well, I appreciate that it resonates with you, and it was inspired by my son. And, I feel like in today's age, we get fed so much kind of fake stuff that people are clamoring for raw, real honesty. And I'm not going to sugarcoat these. I'll post them. But if people don't like the fact that I'm just brutally honest, y'all need to move on, because I'm not changing it. And that's kind of where kind of the letters started, and it evolved into, when you start doing something and you do well at, people go, well, have you ever thought about doing a podcast or a book? And they gave me all sorts of things. And finally, the last one was, have you ever thought about doing a Facebook page? And I said, well, what's that? And they told me, and they said, you don't necessarily have to create new material. You can just copy and paste what you've already got. And then once
Mm-hmm.
you run through it, you'll have to, if you want to keep it up. But, you can do that. And if you want to create a following, you can do that. And that's kind of where the whole ball started rolling to get to where I am today.
So Letters from Zachary now is a Facebook page. How big is it now?
Well, this is my 17th month, and I'm over 1,200 followers just on Facebook. I've got 300 and something on TikTok and about 100 on Instagram. So altogether, about 1,600 followers at this point that have come in and stayed, not kind of come in, seen what it was, and left.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have my kind of regulars every time I post that I notice comment literally every time I post something on there. And I mean, I say the following just because if you'd have told me 17 months ago I would have 1,600 different people following the words I'm putting out there, I'd have looked at you and said, there's no way.
It's funny how that happens. Are most of them men, or do you have a good mix?
I think I have a pretty good mix. Your average like Facebook group typically has about 4% men. As of the other day, my page had 12% men.
Well, there you go.
So I've tripled that, but your active commenters are still women. And initially I did it for specifically men, and then since then I've opened it up basically to everybody. And my thought process was, whether men come here or not, or they're lurkers, meaning they just read everything and never post, at least if their significant other comes in here and sees this and likes something, it can kind of get to them in kind of a backdoor way, if you will.
No, that's a good idea because it's still getting to where you're hoping to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope to achieve with Letters to Zachary?
I'm just here to make this a community. I'm if I have to be the guinea pig for, I don't want to say all men, but if I have to be kind of a general guinea pig for men to see that it's okay to be vulnerable and to open up and nothing earth shattering is going to happen to you, then sign me up. I also want to, one of my other big movements or things that I kind of almost harp on through this community is explaining to women kind of how men what the reasoning is behind how men grieve, and to get them to understand, kind of the how it can be complex on how men can grieve. I know we're generally pretty simple, but there are some things we're complex on, and to get women to understand Well, let me backtrack a little bit. I'm saying what I'm saying about how men grieve so that it gives women a better understanding of how to kind of interact with men as they're grieving. Meaning, throughout this whole time, I've gotten women from time to time say, well, we lost our son or our daughter, and it's been, 6 months, a year, and he's still not opening up. What can I do? And I'll go, well, I've got 10 points I've kind of created that I think will help. I said, I can't say it'll help everybody all the time, but I thought of these. If I weren't as open as what I am, what could I let my wife know to do to kind of help me to get me to open up? And so I try to tell them things all the time. Like one of the ones I say to a lot of women all the time, and I always preface it. I say, now, when I say this, I promise you I'm not personally attacking you. However, if your man comes up to you and he's already shy about coming up to you, about being vulnerable about his emotions, and he says what he's concerned about or gets the courage to tell you, I said, how you respond will determine on if he comes back again. Meaning, if he tells you something and you downplay it, or you're sarcastic, or you're cynical about it, or how can you be upset about it, or one of those style comments, I said, that is subconsciously teaching your husband, boyfriend, whoever, that his feelings don't matter. And then it will always be you first. He will never measure up to you. And that he's going to start thinking, why am I going to try if you're not even going to listen to me or even give me consideration while I'm trying to tell you? And, that's kind of one of the big things I tell a lot of women, just because from the male point of view, that's kind of what I hear, or the other big issue is a lot of men don't want to open up because they know at some point it will get thrown back in their face, and they just don't want to deal
Mm,
with that.
okay.
So,
Okay.
but those is it's kind of those style points that I try to say to a lot of women, but when I talk to everybody, I go, look, I'm not harping on just women. I'm saying this across the board. It's got to be both sides.
Oh, that makes sense. And it's helpful to me even because my husband lost his mother very young, and he
Mm.
still, even to this day, we've been married for a long time. I've known him a long time. He still doesn't really talk about it. And so it's helpful just to hear you say like why that is.
Yes, and what's another one? There's another one I always say. If the stereotype is typically, I'll use my wife and me as an example. There have been times in our relationship where she's had moments where she just wants me to sit down and listen. She doesn't want me to help. She doesn't want me to fix. She doesn't want me to resolve anything. And as much as I resist that urge as a man, because men want to solve problems,
Mhm.
I need to sit there and listen. And so what I try to tell other women and men is, if you expect your husband or your boyfriend or whoever to sit there and listen to your entire spill of whatever you're wanting to say to them without them interrupting and without them trying to fix it, you you need to expect yourself to be able to do that for them. If you can't, then him opening up or even you opening up, that's going to eventually go by the wayside. It's got to be a two-way street on that. If you can't do that, it's going to put a lot of hurdles. Now, some of the things that men deal with can be generational, meaning I'm 48 years old, so I'm Generation X, and we're the rub some dirt on it generation and walk it off. We're, you know, you're crying about that, I'll give you something to cry about it generation. And, I was always taught growing up that, yeah, you can have your moments, but they need to be unto yourself. They need to be short, and you need to get back to what you're doing. Or the other way, analogy that I related to people is, in today's world, they give you 3 days of bereavement and that's it. For men, it's almost expected. Sure, you can have those 3 days. We'll give you those 3 days. But after those 3 days, you need to be beyond it. You need to come back to work and provide, as if grief doesn't last a lifetime. And
Yeah.
so I try to say that to a lot of people to say, I'm not saying these are the end all be all, but you got to understand some of the hurdles that we still have to overcome just to get to the point of opening up from what we've been taught all of our lives. Now, the younger generation, they're getting a little better and a little better about it. But from probably the generation right after mine to older than me, we're all kind of cut of the same cloth.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a lot of pressure to say, hey, you get 3 days off and then I want you to be over it. And then you're just supposed to be normal.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know how, even as women, I don't know how they would expect that to just be like, okay.
And I was a stay at home parent for 12 years. And even after my son passed, I was still at home probably 9 more months at that point. And like my degree's in education, but I came back into education kind of in a different role than what I was. And even at 9 months out, I learned very quickly that that probably wasn't the best to move. But at that point, I had already accepted the job and I didn't have a choice. And I
Yeah.
tell people all the time, even now at 3+ years out, there are a lot of days you don't see them, but I come in wearing a lot of masks.
Yeah. It's, I think a lot of us get caught up in that switching of masks and doing different things all the time instead of
Mhm,
just being the raw and the real.
mhm.
Did your daughter grieve in her own way of losing her brother?
She did. Now, she has developmental delays, and even though she's 16, she functions 7 to 9 years old. So, what my daughter knew was anytime my son got sick, she knew that I would take him. We'd get admitted. We'd be there typically 7 to 10 days is what our average was, and then I would bring him home. Well, the morning that everything happened, I had already gotten her on the bus and sent her off to school. So when he had passed at 10:34 in the morning, she was at school. She had no idea.
Mhm.
So we got home and we brought everything that we had home. We went over to my folks' house because my whole family was there because I had to kind of explain to them everything that had gone on and done some funeral stuff. And when we got home, I looked at my wife and I went, well, we're going to have to tell Samantha somehow, some way, because she has a very, very simplistic way of kind of understanding things. And
Mhm.
so when she got home, she didn't say anything, but she had this look of she called her brother Bubba because that was the easiest thing to say for her. And she would look at me as if to say, well, where's Bubba? You're home, but he's not.
Mhm.
And I looked at her and I said, well, girl, I said, Daddy's got something sad to tell you. I said, Bubba's no longer with us. And she just kind of puzzled look at me. And I said, if Daddy could have brought him home, Daddy would have done anything to bring him home. I said, but Bubba got really sick. And I said, he got called home to heaven. And I said, there was Daddy and the people that were at the hospital did everything they could. And I mean, I don't know how much she got of that. I think she got some of it. For a long while there, I could tell she was angry with me, which is understandable. And I mean, I didn't take it personal. That's the only way she knew how to kind of deal with it.
Mhm.
And eventually, after a certain point, she finally started kind of warming back up to me. And even to this day, there are parts of every day that she would just call out his name and go, Bubba,
Oh.
Bubba, Bubba. And, I can't say for 100% that she completely understood it, but I think there were parts of it that she grasped just in the whole kind of spectrum of things.
Oh, that has to be so hard on those days that she calls out for him.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm a person of faith. I am religious and all, and I do believe that loved ones from the other side, if you will come back and visit. Um, Her brother, when they were both on their lift bus, since they were both in wheelchairs, she sat up front and he sat behind her, and he always watched over her, always, like a hawk. So there were several times when we would eat in the kitchen, and all of a sudden she would literally dead stop what she was doing. She would look up because we got to set a track lighting kind of up to a diagonal to her, and she would stop. She would look up there, and like I couldn't get her attention, like she was focusing on something. And I would look at her and go, "Is Bubba here?" And she would go, "Hmm." I said, "Is he happy?" Hmm. I said, "Is he just checking up on you?" Hmm. I said, "Well, tell him I said hello." Hmm. And then no more than I'd say that, she'd snap at him. We go right back to eating. And
Oh,
she's done that multiple times.
I love it. I mean, if you're gonna get any sign, that might as well be the sign.
Yep.
And then on top of that, you created a grief coloring book, which I love. I think that's an
Yes.
amazing idea. So, what inspired that, and why do you believe it's beneficial?
Well, I'm a very tactile person, and I always knew that at some point I wanted to create something that I could physically hold. So, throughout this whole time, I'd had people saying, "Well, have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I've considered, and I may still do it, but even to this day, writing a book is just a daunting task to me. I mean, I don't know anybody that's written a book that said, "Oh, it's an easy process," but just at this point, it's still a daunting task to me. I may, but I'd gotten into one of the podcasting groups on Facebook, and a publisher out of Boston was she'd posted something. She had a podcast, and she'd posted something to the effect of, I'd love to get people on my podcast, and for the first, say, 5 that are on there, I'll write a press release for you to like put it out on the AP News and to give you promotion and all that. And I messaged her and said, "Hey," I said, "here's my story. I don't know if it's what you do on your podcast." I said, "But I could really use the press release if you'd like to kind of, humor me, if you will, at least until we can talk." So she contacted me and she goes, "Well, I thought about it." And she said that could help, but she said, "I've got another idea that may help you a little more." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, have you ever thought about trying to be published?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if I really want to do a book right now." And she said, "Well, instead of doing a book, have you ever thought about a coloring book?" And I thought for a minute and I went, "Well," I said, "well, that's a little unusual." And I said, "But I like the idea." And I said, "Honestly, I've never been usual a day in my life anyway. So that kind of fits the mold." I said, "So what do we need to do?" She said, "Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a website connected to my publishing company." And she said, "I'm going to create a survey." And she said, "What I'd like you to do is to get anybody in the grief community to come over to the page and fill out the survey." And basically what they did was they filled out, who their loved one was, where they were from, kind of, and then a lot of like positive attributes about them, you know,
Mm-hmm.
favorite toys, favorite places, favorite sayings, just a lot of that type of stuff, maybe a favorite saying or a quote. And so the publisher said, once they do that, we get enough people to make the coloring book. She said, what the illustrators are going to do is they're going to take all their information together, they're going to compile it together, and they're either going to make an actual coloring book page scene or they're going to make kind of a collage scene. And that's what they'll do. So I went out to the grief community and said, "Look, all of y'all have really helped me to get me to where I am. All I'm asking you to do is to fill out this survey. It does not cost you a single penny. It's not going to cost you anything. The only thing it will cost you is when it finally gets published, whatever it costs to purchase the coloring book, which is $14.99. And so I said, that's all it's going to cost you. I said, and then if you get selected to be in there, which I'm guaranteeing just about all of you will be, you will then have a living, active, and interactive memorial that you can put your hands on and that will be on kind of life's bookshelf, if you will, and will outlast us all." And so I got a massive response in that. So this is the front cover of it. Letters to
Oh,
Zachary, and then kind of a little bio down below. And the way it goes is, for example, this is Tanner. That's kind of his collage page of several things he didn't like that he liked. Um, just some of the wording and the heart in there, and then on the other page is kind of the attributes about him, and
Oh,
that's all the pages in there that are in there. So even though my family and me are probably the first 5 or 6 sections in there, there's like 32 other participants in there. And I have, outside of maybe 3 or 4 in there, I've either met personally or I've met them online. So I've met literally all of them that are in the coloring book. So that was kind of the reason why I did it. The other reason why I wanted to do it was I was sitting back thinking, and I went, probably a lot of these families had a child pass away and they had a sibling that's still around. And so I thought, what could I do that could kind of de-stress the situation, which coloring is considered a de-stressing activity that the kid could do, and then that would kind of give me as the adult time to kind of brainstorm as they're coloring on things that I can say to them in a simplistic way to explain difficult topics of grief and death and trauma and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of a couple of fold as to why I decided to do it.
I mean, why way to turn something that is so difficult into something so beautiful. What a great idea.
Certainly, yeah. I'm again. It was one of those things that in the most simplistic reason is I wanted something to hold, something that I could have my hands on. I mean, outside of some of the other things that are in his room, but I wanted to make something positive associated with his legacy, just because he lived such the medically difficult life, even though he lived 15 years.
Yeah. I'm sure that was difficult. Was he happy though? Was he a very happy boy?
He was the most laid back child I think I have ever met. Nothing ever bothered him. He never met a stranger. Um, there were times when I had to give him a catheter to like drain his bladder that he would get on the floor. He'd lay on the floor. He'd almost cross his legs. He'd put his hands behind his head and just look at me like, all right, let's get this show on the road. And I mean, because that's all he knew. I mean,
Mhm.
he got to a point where I had to enter it into him. He didn't even flinch anymore because he was just so used to it.
Yeah. I mean, that part is unfortunate, but I mean, it sounds like he made the best out of it.
He did. He was always happy. He he got comments literally from everybody that walked by because he had crystal clear blue eyes that everybody commented on. Um,
Oh.
he he definitely loved women. He did not discriminate at all. In fact, he had a hierarchy. It was blonde haired, brown haired, brunette haired, black haired, and then redheads. And literally in that order.
Oh my goodness. That's too cute.
Yeah, they would come around and say how cute he was, and he'd open his arms as to give him a hug and all that. And I'd look at him and go, buddy, I know exactly what you're doing. I said, don't think I said, you may be fooling them, but you're not fooling me.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah.
Oh, well, for anybody that wants to buy the coloring book, which I'm assuming it's available, where can they find
Yes.
it?
Well, anybody that's interested in the coloring book or Letters to Zachary, you can go to letterstozachary.com. And Zachary is spelled Zachary. I know some people spell it Ey. And from there, like I've got all my social media links and media appearances and about me and books and resources, that kind of thing. But the coloring book, if you scroll down, I believe it's the 4th section down. There's a picture of the coloring book and there's a button and it takes you directly to Amazon.
Perfect. And for anybody that wants to join your Facebook community, I'm assuming it's the same, the letters to Zachary?
It, Yes, Facebook is Letters to Zachary. All of them are the exact same logo as my webpage, so it's uniform across the board. Um, TikTok and Instagram are letters to, my call sign is Letters to Zachary, but it's Letters to Zachary 2022 on TikTok and Instagram for those that are interested.
Awesome. And of course, I will put all the links in the show notes to make it super easy for everybody.
Sure.
And do you have any final advice or final just things that you want to leave my listeners with?
Um, I will tell people that are in grief, the quote that I kind of created that I've said religiously these days is, though I strive for the mountaintop, it is the valley in which I live. And what I mean by that is, yes, we all want to get to the pinnacle of life and enjoy all the wonderful views and just the high life, if you will. But it's fortunately and unfortunately, it's living in these in the valley, which can have hard times that make us who we are to get to those points. And there's no greater thing to try to live through to overcome than grief, loss of a loved one, whether it's, a spouse, a sibling, a child, you name it.
And I love that you created your own quote. How fantastic.
Well, it was just a way to kind of make a succinct way to explain things. Because before I was coming up with 100 different ways, and I thought I've got to come up with something uniform.
Yeah, something that you can just say that's
Yeah,
simple, that sticks in
mm,
people's memory. I
yeah.
got you. I got you.
Mm.
Well, thank you so, so much for being here, Jason, and being vulnerable and raw with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure being on.
And this is how to deal when the shit gets real, guys. I will see you all next episode.